I study how the future changes real time based on our perceptions of the world, and the stakes are way higher than you think. I'll give you an example. In the early 60s, there was a music group that kept on getting rejected by record labels. They were told that guitar groups are on their way out and that they have no future in show business. It wasn't until they met a record store owner named Brian Epstein, who heard them play at a local music club and offered to manage them, that their lives began to change. This group was the Beatles. Now, Brian wasn't super familiar with the inner workings of the music industry, but he saw something in the Beatles that no one did at the time. He worked tirelessly to secure their record deal and to shape their public persona. Under his management, the Beatles went on to become one of the most successful and influential bands of all time. Brian is what I call a quantum connection to the Beatles. Someone who had an eye for something and no one else did. And he was able to capture the upward potential of the Beatles, even though there was no guarantee that it will benefit him at all. But in today's world, with the rise of technology and social media, it's become so easy to reduce people down to superficial metrics: followers, likes, income, productivity. Essentially, people that appear to give us some kind of predictable return based on their current state of being. I call this a Newtonian relationship. But this isn't just in the entertainment industry. This happens in corporate culture, our homes, community clubs. Humans have become more linear and transactional in nature, even though we don't think, feel, grow linearly as human beings. This has led to major repercussions across various facets of our lives. Who we choose to date, who we choose to marry, who we choose to work for, have been largely reduced to short-term transactional convenience. So why is quantum relationship the answer to fixing this phenomena? Because according to quantum physics, all possibilities exist, but it is our observation that can influence the outcome. And as technological advancements and economic challenges put pressure on our time and focus, our ability to control what we can perceive about each other, ourselves, and the world around us has greatly diminished. As you can only imagine, this greatly shapes our decision-making process, which could lead to suboptimal outcomes. So if it is true that our perceptions can change the future, not only should we be conscious of how we perceive each other and ourselves, but we should also participate in helping each other interpret our realities more mindfully in order to unlock a greater collective potential. For example, Brian could have easily told the Beatles that they had no future in music, and that could have been the very last time that they ever tried. And we may have never heard their songs again. So if we can fortify the very pillars that our internal worlds are built on, our perceptions, with quantum relationship practices, we may just be able to create a more invincible future together. Of course, relationships are not perfectly analogous to physics, but it is true that not a single person can observe all points of view at once. And it is also true that two people can experience the exact same events and have a completely different outcome, which is what happened to the Beatles. So how do we practice quantum relationships? Here are 3 concrete steps inspired by 3 fundamental concepts of quantum physics. The first concept is the concept of superposition. When a particle is in superposition, it exists in multiple states at once until a single state is observed. So for example, in a deck of playing cards, when a card is facing down, no one really knows what it is, for sure, until it is flipped over and revealed. In other words, all possibilities exist, but what ends up materializing is what we observe. How does this translate to our relational practice? We can consciously choose to perceive the highest meaning in a situation. If all possibilities are real, why can't we point out the most positive interpretation of a circumstance and uplift one another rather than give a negative knee jerk reaction? Even if we mean well, how can we not habitualize assuming or jumping to the worst conclusion? There are ways to encourage multiple perspectives and meanings without being dishonest or unrealistic. For example, Brian didn't see a version of the Beatles that everybody else saw. He simply saw a version that didn't materialize yet. He didn't just decide that they had no future. Using superposition, he simply decided they needed a different audience. The second concept is called quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement is when two or more particles are influencing each other no matter how far apart they are. There is a very simple yet powerful relational technique with this. Do not let your past influence other people's futures. We all know not to let our own past influence our own futures, but what about other people's futures? Our personal histories, traumas, actions very much have a ripple effect on other people because we're social creatures, constantly operating off of feedback 24/7. How often do bosses, parents, lovers, peers, friends control, demand, project onto one another in order for their own dreams or fears to be validated or coddled? And how often do people actually adjust themselves and their choices for their loved ones, even if it's a cost to them and their personal truth? On the flip side, how often do we write off innocent people because they triggered our deepest wounds? But that could have been the key to our growth. If the past is the very thing that we're trying to shake out of, it's not enough that we're aware of the story. We should also be in tune with how our unconscious perceptions influence other people, positively or negatively. And instead of just rationalize it away, use it as feedback to address our unresolved stories. By various accounts, the Beatles didn't want to work with Brian either. They had such bad experience with managers before. But after meeting with him a couple of times, they decided to give him a shot. Remember though, Brian wasn't very experienced in the music industry. So this was still a risk regardless across the board. This just goes to show you the importance of not letting your past and your perceptions get in the way of relationships, because it could prevent positive, unexpected outcomes for everyone involved. The third and final concept is the concept of quantum interference. Quantum interference is when the final state of the particle is the sum of all other possible states and their individual magnitudes. So for example, an Olympic athlete could win a gold, silver, bronze, or nothing at all. All these outcomes exist, just at different probabilities. And an amazing coach will do whatever it takes to bump them from a bronze path to a gold path by observing and tweaking the routines and habits rather than saying, that's it, you're stuck with the bronze, sorry. How does this translate to a relational practice? See yourself and others in ways that will increase the odds of success, not decrease it. People often conflate being a pessimist with being a realist. But as we just discussed, with superposition and quantum entanglement, we're constantly influencing each other with our past and our perceptions. So if the path that ends up materializing is the one with the highest probability, we need to confront the ways in which we perceive and behave that not only decelerate our success, but the success of those around us. And no matter how dismal the situation seems, look for an angle or an opening to tilt the scale in our favor, rather than throw the baby out with the bathwater. The Beatles were very rough around the edges when they first met Brian. In fact, that is the reason why Brian couldn't quickly land them a record deal. But he continued to advocate for them. He continued to study where they could have a competitive edge. In fact, it was his idea that they wore suits on stage so that they appear more professional. Essentially, he was obsessed with landing on a winning formula rather than focusing on the failures and the rejections. In today's world, across virtually every single industry, we are inundated with KPIs and early indicators of success that are designed to help us form early decisions. And some of them may be completely valid. But what if some are also self-fulfilling prophecies as a result of us observing downside risk first? And how many wonderful opportunities can we be shutting down every single day as a result? Today, more than ever, we need quantum relationships. People who see what data or trends don't capture. People who see potential in us before we see it in ourselves. In fact, the relationships that make us the most resilient, powerful, and well-rounded are not the ones that are the most convenient or comfortable. We all know that one person that lifted us out of dark times when we didn't want to get out of it. We all know that one person that told us to go start the company when we didn't think we were qualified. We all know that one person that gave us very difficult truth at the cost of losing the relationship, but their perspective and insights change our lives forever. Similarly, the most consciousness-raising inventions and movies of all time were not the ones that were really popular at first. The introduction of cars, airplanes, internet all drew a lot of backlash because people didn't feel safe. Cult classic films such as The Matrix or The Schindler's List faced a lot of resistance from producers at first because the contents were out there and triggering. It's really no different in relationships. The very future that seems unreachable to us may be unlocked through those who have an unfamiliar yet positively different perceptions than us. So the true implication of quantum relationship is self-responsibility, because we can't practice quantum relationship with each other, let alone ourselves, unless we are hypercritical of our unconscious perceptions that put a limit on how we view the world, and therefore put a limit on the potential paths that could unfold. And without this self-responsibility piece, we may continue to operate in a transactional, short-term type of way where we only show up and assist and help to the extent that we feel safe, and technically there's nothing wrong with that. Except all it does is protect us from the downside risk of a relationship rather than capture the upward potential. So if we can fortify the very pillars that our internal worlds are built on with quantum relationship practices, we are giving ourselves permission to expand our mental and emotional real estates in directions that our past selves would have never thought possible. So if there's one thing you can take away from this today to start practicing quantum relationship, it is this. Instead of asking, what can you do for me? Start asking, what do you see that I don't? Try this and see how your future changes real time. Thank you.